In 2020, the amp choices you have for any budget are extremely good. To narrow it down though, the number of tube amp choices you have is also extremely good, but the budget will be higher. A tube amp uses valves, also known as tubes, to power the preamp and the power amp sections of the amplifier. In this video, I'm looking at the legendary Fender Hotrod amp, and no, it won't be spinning in the corner of the video. It weighs 50 odd pounds. So why should you choose a tube amp over, say, a modelling amp anyway? Modelling amps, after all, have a ton of different sounds and effects. They're ready to go with overdrive, saturation, reverb and compression, etc. It's like having an audio engineer put a perfect pedal board in front of the amp all ready to go. Well, tube amps have a particular sound, a warmth, a chime, a sensitivity of touch that's difficult to model, although software and IRs are getting really close. First amp I had back in the day was a Roland Cube. Then after that I went straight for the Hotrod Deluxe. Since then I've loved the sound of valves in an amplifier, and when I first moved here to Chicago I bought a Fender Mustang GT100. I'm a big Fender fanboy, but that amp was just so flat. Clean tone was way too sterile for me and it didn't cut it, so I got rid of it and I bought the Hotrod 4 and those clean tones. I do find it strange that the Hotrod isn't on anyone's list of classic amps, because I've lost count of how many times the Hotrod is on stage whenever I go to a live gig. I guess you either love it or you loathe it. Initially introduced in 1996, the amp features 3 channels with shared presence and equalization controls, and also high-low inputs. On the control panel there are 2 sockets for preamp output and power amp input. These can be used as an effects loop, or you can plug the preamp output from one Hotrod into the power amp input of a second Hotrod to run both at the same time. The control panel of the first amp runs the second amp too, except for the reverb and presence. Even with single coils, the Hotrod Deluxe's first channel really doesn't offer much in the way of clean headroom. Although the volume pot taper on the Hotrod 4 has been tamed a little better over earlier versions, it's still a little easier to dial in the sweet spot though. If you plan to crank up the volume, then at 5 it can sound nice and creamy, whereas between 6 and 7 you're into quite heavy overdrive territory. About 8 is when the distortion kicks in and it can get a little grainy. The Hotrod isn't best known for its heavy distortion sounds, but that's where the pedals come in, as this amp is the perfect pedal platform. Switching over to channel 2 is where the dirt comes in, and the more drive gives you even more, controlled using the supplied foot switch. At higher volume levels though, disengaging the bright switch will clean things up, and it can start to sound surprisingly tweedy. The equalization on the amp is something that you'll want to tweak to your own taste. You get bass, mid, treble and presence. It's a 40-watt amp with a 12-inch Celestion A-type speaker, and the bass, mid and treble response, in my opinion, just sounds so controlled when I use a clean tone, which is why I bought it. Some people do report that the bass can be flubby, but I don't hear that. Everyone has a different tone that they hear in their head, that they chase, which makes the amp market so diverse, catering to many different types of player. The spring reverb on the Hotrod 4 amp sounds incredibly good. The usable reverb happens between 1 and 3 on the dial. After that, things can get seriously wet. The presence control adds a touch of sparkle to the high end, without really introducing a whole lot more of the treble frequencies to the tone. The Hotrod series of amps have also been accused of being too loud, and whilst this is definitely the case, there are devices available like the JHS little amp box that I particularly use to tame the amp and get some preamp saturation whilst keeping the volume low. This sits in the effects loop, although of course you could just use your existing EQ pedal if you have one, set it to flat and use the volume to the same end. Alternatively, and probably the better option, is to use an attenuator or power soak between the amp and the speaker. The speaker's connected to the amp via a jack plug at the rear. That gets all the tubes cooking at bedroom or practice levels. The version 4 also has a lighter pine cabinet, 40 watts of power, a beautiful clean tube sound, a warm low end and a gorgeous spring reverb. These are of course only my opinions, and other players will have different opinions, but that's what makes the world go round. You always need to tweak your amp according to your taste and environment anyway, because it's going to sound very different in your living room or bedroom to playing live in a big boomy hall or being drowned out by a drummer. But that's where good pedals come in. I've said it though in previous videos, one day I really would like to buy the new Fender Tone Master, or ideally the 65 Deluxe Reverb, or of course the Tone King Imperial. But I won't be selling the Hotrod anytime soon. Plus you can get early versions of the Hotrod for a song online. Now you either love or you hate the Fender Hotrod. So let's have a discussion in the comments about the amp that you have and love. I mean, amps are a subjective matter of taste, but for me, for now, it's the Fender Hotrod.